Welcome to Lead a Horse to Water, the equine training and behaviour podcast. Now, I have a quick question here from the wonderful Heather McManamy, and it really piqued my interest so much that I wanted to have a little ramble about it on the podcast and maybe disappear down a rabbit hole that you might like to join me in. Heather asked me, can negative reinforcement be constructional in the same way that positive reinforcement is, with successive approximations and shaping? So first of all, I think it's important for us to consider what constructional is. So in terms of constructional, it's really pretty much as it says, but not many people seem to talk about this in terms of practical training. I hear it talked about with the academics and the theory of it quite a lot, but the practical nature of constructional training is all about constructing, building behaviours with small steps, and as Heather says, with shaping, with approximations, but it goes a lot deeper than that. So constructional is, for me, where we start touching on the idea of less error or error-less training, where we're looking at whether we can introduce a new concept for a horse to learn without the pressures, without forcing them to do it, and in such a way that the behavior just naturally pops out and we can help the horse to expand their repertoire of behaviors in that way. Constructional comes very much from behavior training, behavior change training, and that's a little bit different to a place that we often find ourselves when we're just training horse. If we're training horse to walk, trot and canter, we might feel we're in a slightly different place than we are when we are trying to change a behavior. So importantly, when we look at constructing behavior, what we don't want to do is break a behavior. So it's looking away from the idea of stopping a behavior, punishing a behavior, using those quadrants in the punishment area where we say, no, you don't do that. I don't want you to a dog. I don't want you to jump up. I want you to sit there and do this. So it's finding ways that you can make it clear to your learner, to your horse, that there are other ways that you can do this that will get the reinforcer that you want without you having to display the difficult behavior. Now, this came originally from some wonderful research from Kelly Snyder, and I think she came out of the lab of Jesus Rosales Rios some years ago. I think this was her dissertation project. It might have been her PhD. Forgive me, it's a long time since I looked at all of that. But originally it came about from aggression training with dogs. So a dog is aggressive towards another dog. They might be aggressive at a certain point when the dog gets to a certain point and they can't cope any longer. And so they show signs of aggression. So what you're trying to do is give the dog other behaviors that they might be able to show rather than that aggression, rather than barking, lunging, biting, which means that they have got strategies that they can use when they're in our human world. The same thing for horses. We often now see that translated into CAT. People often talk about the CAT-H protocols. I just use a constructional type training program. I don't align myself with anybody particularly, but just that idea of a constructional approach where we're thinking of a logical way to let the horse deal with what's happening in the time that we are with them with that trigger. So let's think of an example. It's always a lot easier to think about examples. So if a horse is fearful of humans, for instance, we can approach that horse, find that threshold. Where is the threshold today that horse reacts? And we can stop before then, where there's just the tiniest hint of the horse showing us they have a problem with something. And so the horse sees that and they see us stop and they think, okay, by that little look, that tiny, tiny showing of whatever behavior, it might have been an ear flicking onto us, it might have been them looking our way, but it's not overtly worried, fearful, aggressive, or any of those things. And as soon as they go back to maybe eating their hay or grazing or just chilling and just ignoring us, we take ourselves away. We remove the pressure. So technically, this is a negative reinforcement protocol. In theory, there are some other theories around this, and I'm happy to talk to somebody on the podcast about that. If that's one of your things that you'd like to talk about, do drop me a message. But whatever, the idea is that the horse gets to use another behavior rather than that full-blown charging at you aggressive one. But more importantly, what it does is give that horse the ability to tell you how it's feeling on that day. So if on day one we get to be 10 meters away from the horse before it shows that subtle sign, the way that this training approach works is that if on day 2 I can only get 20 meters away, I honor it, because the important thing is that the horse learns that they can control you with that small amount of behavior. Not running at the fence, just that little ear on you saying, hey, I'm not happy with you being there. So that's what's fundamentally different in terms of this and shaping something. So yeah, sure, the behavior gets shaped. The ability for the human to move closer to the horse is shaped, but it's all driven by the horse rather than the human. So in a regular positive reinforcement shaping plan, we have little steps and we say, within this, I'm going to ask for 1 step of walk, 2 steps of walk, 3 steps of walk, and we shape more steps of walk. We might, in the approach situation, we might do that switch into positive reinforcement once the horse is really good and comfortable with us in that close-up zone with them, and we might swap. We might say, well, I'm going to move my hand in such a way and I will mark and reinforce you for standing still while I do those things. So we can swap from that negative reinforcement protocol into a positive one. But I think what Heather's saying in her words is more about a training situation. And that's where I'm probably less likely to use a constructional approach in the way that we might think of a behavior change one. So for me, a constructional approach in regular training, say it's mounting block or lifting a hoof or anything like that, but the horse is no longer fearful, we just need to shape the process. And I think it is very difficult with negative reinforcement to do this. It's definitely a thought process that I want to go through and talk through with you. So let's have a think about this and how this might play out. So let's look at a positive reinforcement situation first of all. Let's think about asking the horse to back up, for instance. We have a horse that's already learned to walk forwards and to stand still, so we can maybe do a little bit of walking through some parallel poles. Some people like to use mats, some people like to use a target to lure the horse into stepping back. But we get to a point where if we hold between 2 poles and we look forwards, the horse is going to offer us stepping forwards. The chances are if we turn around and face the opposite way that the horse is going to have to think about it for a moment. They may well adjust their balance to think about how they're going to approach this solution. We can mark it and we can build some steps back out of that. There are many other ways we could do it, but just giving you some idea. So we're not on a rope, we're not using any touch in terms of pressure, and we're not staring down the horse. We are just casually a few feet away, turning our position to look a different way. We're not forcing them, we're not standing in front of them. We are literally just changing the environment by the way we face. That is, for me, a brilliant positive reinforcement setup to use. Now let's think about how we would do it with negative reinforcement. So with negative reinforcement, we can have our horse either on a rope or not. We can use the tiniest feel of pressure on the rope, which is attached to a head collar or halter. You put that tiny amount of non-escalating pressure because that's the only pressure that I want to use. So I'm going to put the tiniest feel. So it's literally that idea of one hand holding another. It's that tiniest feel. And we put that subtle pressure on and the horse steps back and we release it. In fact, as they step back, they will self-release it. So it's quite an easy one in terms of rope pressure. It's harder with leg pressure, I think. So we put that tiniest feel on the rope and the horse steps back. And if we've got a brilliant horse who has not been messed about by a lot of excessive pressure and punishment from the human, they try and respond. So when we start out with the horse, the idea of offering some amount of pressure like that, we could just hold the rope, wait for the horse to respond in any way, because what we want them to be able to do is understand how they can relieve that pressure. For those of you shouting at me, and I don't think there's many of you who listen to the podcast who are really in the negative reinforcement world, but if you are and you're listening to this episode and you're saying, yeah, but it's not relief because it's not heavy, it's not harsh, you have to look at behaviorism and through that lens understand that reinforcement, negative reinforcement, apply pressure, the horse offers more because they were able to remove the pressure by giving you the behavior. So that step back, relieved the pressure, removed the pressure, and the horse will offer more because they know now when that rope has that pressure on it that they should take the step back. And because it happens cleanly and because we're very clear about how we relieve that pressure, the horse learns to step back. Now, the way we could shape that in Heather's question with approximations is that in that very first attempt, the horse barely moves. But we remove the pressure so quickly that they're like, I'm in the right place. Exactly the same with positive reinforcement. Remember I said we might set up our environment that it yields a behavior. Behavior can pop out of the setup, the antecedent, the occasioning setup, and the horse just starts to offer you more because we just wait out that tiny moment longer to put our click on. So with negative reinforcement, you don't up the pressure if you're doing it properly. You just leave that pressure on for that little moment longer until the horse is offering it for more steps. So if off the tiniest feel you got a half step backwards, or the horse thinking they might step backwards, you release it. You do that a few times and then you just hold it for that little bit longer. You don't escalate it. You just hold it for that bit longer and the horse does the thing for a bit longer. Now, what we have to remember in all of this is that fundamentally the way that this works is by your release being super clean. And you have to have some sort of shaping plan for that. You have to, first of all, name the behavior. And people always laugh when I'm talking about planning. Oh, I don't plan. I just go out and do it by the seat of my pants. But first of all, you need to plan a situation where this is going to happen. I want the horse to step back. We're going to be in the arena. I would like to put the lightest of pressure on the rope and the horse will take a step backwards. Or maybe you want to use a verbal cue. Back. That's fine. We can transfer cues, negative or positive. It really doesn't make any difference whichever way round. Now, I'm just going to underline here for those of you thinking I've lost the plot and I'm heavily going over to the negative reinforcement side. I'm not, but I'm explaining how behavior works. And I think it's really important that we do that because people just see negative reinforcement as the devil. And we should dig into it and understand actually how it functions rather than just chucking it out all the time and saying it's the devil's work. Because I think if we could teach everybody to use negative reinforcement correctly, we'd be in a much better place than trying to teach a very, very few people positive reinforcement. That doesn't mean that I'm changing my aims. I want to use positive reinforcement wherever I can, which will be in 0.9% of situations for me when I'm doing the training always. And I encourage my students to do the same too. But I do think it's important that we're aware of how negative reinforcement works. So sorry, that was a public service announcement on behalf of positive reinforcement based training. To go back to the negatives. Yeah, first of all, we need to name that behavior. Back, rein back, step back, whatever you want to call it. Doesn't matter. Then it's not in the name. It's just that you do it. So name that behavior. And then think, what have I got that's anywhere near that already? Does your horse have a stepping back at a gate, for instance, where already it's learned to step back because the gate's moving towards it? Pressure and release, gate moves towards me, I step back, I remove the pressure. Hey, we're working with behaviorism. Who thought? So, maybe it exists somewhere else. And if it does, that's a really sensible place to go off and start. But let's just assume we don't have one anywhere else. And we're going to do this standing in the barn or standing in the yard or in the arena. Really simple, straightforward place where we might train other things. And so we set up in still the same way as we do in positive reinforcement. The situation, the environment has to be perfect. No distractions. Another horse not too far away in case the horse is stressed about things when they're on their own. the horse needs to be living their best life already. They need to have friends, forage, freedom, a la Fraser plus. That's a minimum point. We always say that. So, it has to have that perfect life. And then we can think about doing our training. So we're in the perfect environment. That doesn't change whichever way you're looking at it, from negative or positive. And then we want the horse to step back. So we may well turn our bodies anyway, the same way as I would with positive reinforcement, so that I'm turning to face the horse's chest at their side, but facing that way. Why? Because horses know, they're very quick to catch on that we face the way we walk. Therefore, maybe if we're turning the other way, that's something in the environment that changes. So already I'm getting savvy about my training. Yeah, I'm not just sitting on my laurels and thinking I could pull on this rope and get something. No, I'm setting up the environment to work for me. And then I could have the tiniest feel on the rope. I mean, literally your hand closing around it, and I see what the horse does. And I just keep it there. No big deal. I keep it there for a maximum of a few seconds. And I think, what have I got here? And if the horse does 0, I know that that horse has probably had previous bad experience with humans and training and pressure. And I wouldn't even think of helping that person to learn better negative reinforcement yet, because we need that horse to become what we might call operant. We need them to learn that they can offer behaviours to get things. So I would probably, if it's a person that's not yet ready to train with food, at that point I might start thinking about coming in with scratches and naturally moving myself back so the horse moves back so I can capture behaviours. You've heard me talk about those things before on the podcast. This is meant to be a quick answer, not going on for hours and hours. So there's the point for me, which I think is where Heather's possibly stuck, because if your horse doesn't give it you right at the beginning, what are you going to do? You're going to take a harder, firmer feel on it? I'm not. If that's your choice, you may well, in which case you could lighten up. Because if you use more, so you go to use that light pressure, which is the only one I would use, and the horse doesn't respond to it, you then have to get bigger, escalate. You escalate, and finally there's a point at which you escalate to that the horse goes, yeah, actually, I think this is unpleasant enough that I'm going to step backwards. They step backwards and you release it. And then gradually you go to the same light pressure to begin with, see if the horse thinks about that, predicting the heavier pressure. So there's a threat involved. Feels horrible. Hate the choice of words there, but I think they're honest. And so you have that feel on the rope. The lighter feel predicts that if they don't do it from the light feel, the heavier feel will come next, which is why it's not a way that I personally would like to introduce things. Now, that is aside from the idea of shaping the behavior. So shaping that behavior just means that we take things in a slightly different way, that we will use that feel, and instead of releasing it after that very first response, we might ask the horse a split second longer. I'm not going to release so quickly because I want a whole step backwards, and then I'll release. And of course, then we can shape on from that, because it's the same thing. Each time, whether we're using positive or negative, when we're shaping, we're holding out for that little bit longer. If we shape with positive reinforcement, we're withholding our click for just the tiniest moment longer. Remember, shaping involves the tiniest amount of difference from another try. And why does that difference come about? Well, sometimes it comes about because of the very beginnings of extinction-based behaviours. So that's when the horse is thinking, hang on, what else do I have to throw at this? And so they change the behaviour enough that we can mark something slightly different. For me, though, it comes back to that naming the behaviour. If I want a back, I want one step of back. I will re-cue for more time. So one step means I need to train first the thought process. So that is that when I put my hand on the rope to get the pressure, feel that really light feel, and you can call it what you like, tactile. I'm not teaching this through positive reinforcement. I'm teaching this as a negative reinforcement protocol. I have my hand on the rope, I feel it, and the horse kind of engages its brain, and you feel that almost the horse is going to go back, and I release, and they're like, was that it? Gosh, that was easy. You do that several times, but not too many times, and you hold it for just that little bit longer, and they go, yeah, it's this, isn't it? And then they think, maybe it isn't this. and they offer you something else, which might be that whole step back, and you release on that. So the shaping is exactly the same. I think I've probably gone above the remit that I meant to for Heather, but I think you can't discuss these things without opening the whole can of worms up a bit. So I've dug in a little tiny bit there to give you an idea about, yeah, I do believe you can shape. It is about successive approximations, but you are going to keep that pressure in the same place, but not escalate it, for me. So for other people, they're happy to have a whip tap. I just say it's how a lot of people come to positive reinforcement. How much bigger do I have to get for the horse to offer this behavior? So if you're looking at all those checks and balances that I've mentioned, living the best life, function, freedom, minimum. Is it a healthy, happy place emotionally to learn in? Is the horse happy on that day? In terms of, have they been out? Have they had access to food and water before you're trying? All those things. And is the behavior clear for them to understand? And are you responding quickly? If all that is met, then yeah, definitely you can use successive approximations and shaping with negative as well. One thing that I really would suggest that everyone does, though, in that case, is that they make sure that the cue they want to use is either very carefully used at the beginning, because remember, with negative reinforcement, naturally the cue that you end up with is what you trained it with, so it becomes, the pressure is what trains it. So for a lot of people, it might be nice to use perhaps a tiny touch of the fingers on the chest rather than the feel on the rope, so that you could ask the horse to step back from that feel, that touch on the chest. Again, it has to be something that what the horse wants to remove. Otherwise, you're not getting any reinforcement. I mean, that's the definition of reinforcement, is that, by relieving that pressure, that more behavior is offered next time you use that same feel of your hand under the chest there. So we could then transfer that to a rope cue. So we can hold the rope in our hand, we can touch our other hand to the chest, and when the horse steps back from the chest the first few times, we release that pressure. But then we begin to have the feel on the rope, the lightest feel, followed immediately by the touch of the chest, and both pressures release. So then the feel on the rope becomes a predictor for the touch on the chest. So you can sort of distance a little bit from that pressure. But these are all very technical thought processes, and personally I'd rather just work with positive reinforcement as and when I absolutely have to use any negative reinforcement. It's only because it's going to be better for that horse and that human in that situation. So there's a couple of things that to finish with. Constructional really comes from the idea of not telling your learner what you don't want. So if you're asking your horse to step back, it might be because you didn't want them stepping forwards into your space. Well, I'm not going to teach a step back for that. I'm going to teach the horse how to be in my space. So often reinforcers will be functional because they give the horse what they want. And if the horse wanted to come into your space because they're concerned, maybe giving them another way to express that concern is a better option than teaching them to step back to, no, I don't want you there. Of course, you could teach step back in a kind way, positive reinforcement based way. You could teach them, if this thing happens, like somebody approaches or a horse comes from behind, take a step back and I will come to you. You could teach your horse anything. But functional for me is important, because for a behavior to be functional means that it helps the horse fit into the world in which we have placed them. That's not their world, it's our world. So I have some problems when I start thinking about constructional approaches and functional outcomes when I'm talking about teaching a horse to be ridden, for instance, because that's all about us. And fundamentally for me, a lot of the times when I'm using that CAT approach, that constructional approach to training, I'm really helping a horse work their way through and live and thrive in my world. So I'm giving them tools to deal with the stimuli that they will find in my world. I'm not necessarily encouraging them to want to act under my will for me to ride them. I think there are ways which we can allow so much choice in terms of riding and working with us that it makes it okay, but I don't necessarily think that when we look at constructional approaches that should be our focus. I don't think personally that I should be considering what I want to do is important. The outcome that I'm really looking for is, can this make the horse feel comfortable? Then if I choose to want to ride, then I need to be adding choice. I need to be adding degrees of freedom. Now, of course, all of my students find themselves at different places on this continuum. Nobody is getting it 100% right. Maybe at that point, we won't be riding horses. I don't know. Maybe so much will come out of the knowledge that we all put into this that we can deal with things in a different way. I don't know. But for now, it feels like we're very much finding our way to a better place for horses, and we can't see where that outcome is going to be. But a short answer to Heather's, can we shape with successive approximations using negative? Absolutely, we can. Can we do it using non-escalating negative reinforcement? I believe we can, but not if that horse is not already, two negatives there, oops. The horse needs to be living their best life. If there is any pain, discomfort, they're not in a good place to train, then no, we can't do any of this. And I see this when I'm training horses. The horse will say, clearly, I can't do this. I don't want to leave this bucket where you've thrown some food for me. I don't want to carry on. And we say, well, what on earth? Why today? Well, we don't know, because the horse can't talk to us, only with their language of their bodies. And so we need to see that behaviour as the conversation. And so often that is roughshod, ridden over. Excuse the pun, not intended. I'm tired. My brain is used up now. So yes, Heather, I think we can use successive approximations, but we have to be cautious with it when we're using negative reinforcement. And personally, I would much prefer to use positive reinforcement every time. I will be talking a little bit about this in my presentation, in my Sunday practical demonstration at Understand Horses Live, which if you haven't got a ticket for, I think there are just a very few left. So if you want to join us at Nottingham Trent University for that, you haven't got long. It's less than a month's time in August. So do think about joining us for that. There'll be some great presentations and practicals on the Sunday. Saturday's all lecture based. But yeah, I think it's really important that we learn, whether we're using negative or positive reinforcement, to set up good learning environments so that we can promote easy training for the horse rather than things that are way too complicated and too hard for them. I'm not sure if I answered your question, Heather. I hope I did in some way, and maybe it's something you can come back to me with. But it's all about responding to what the horse gives you in the moment. And I think that's quite nuanced, and I think we need to have that right amount of feel for it. Thanks for such a brilliant question, and it's made me think a lot, and to take out what I feel, what I do in the field, how I feel about these things, and then actually talking about them. It's quite a journey to bring all those together. Hope you'll join me again soon. I have a guest recording coming up next week. Join me soon for some guest interviews and lots more, hopefully, over the summer. Remember, have fun, but train kindly while you're doing so. See you again soon.